Hello everyone and welcome to a really wild game that was played in round 5, so the first game of the day in Airthings Masters in the preliminaries between Magnus Carlsen and Daniil Dubov. We already mentioned in the previous video that it's almost unimaginable to see a game where Dubov plays and that it's not like a crazy interesting game or something. So let's see how he does against the world champion Magnus Carlsen. And as most of you know, Dubov was one of Carlsen's seconds during his World Chess Championship match against Fabiano Caruana. So he knows quite a lot of what Magnus knows and can use this against him. So let's see how this game goes. Magnus has the white pieces and he opens with e4. Dubov replies with c5, goes for the Sicilian as Magnus would. We have knight to f3, knight to c6 and bishop to b5. So just attacking that knight, going for the Rosolimo. We have g6, preparing to fianchetto the dark square bishop, and Magnus just castles here. We have bishop to g7 by Dubov, and now captures on c6. So this is a well-known line, b captures, and rook to e1. And here, knight to h6 by Dubov. You don't want to develop it to f6, so you allow e5 to come with tempo at any point, so c3. And now comes castles by Dubov. We have d4, Magnus strikes in the center. Dubov trades once with captures, and now d5, or preparing to trade in the center here. So Magnus, of course, advances the pawn to e5. And here, although it seems like white has a very strong presence in the center, you can always undermine this with moves like c5, or as it was played in the game, with f6. And this has all been played before, so it's nothing new for either of them. Magnus goes h3, takes away the g4 square from Dubov's bishop, and here we have a trade. F captures on e5, d captures on e5, and now c5. This position has been reached before. It's been played once in the World Blitz Women's Championship in 2018 between Lea Garifulina and Natalia Buksha. And ended in a draw where knight to f7 was played, so the knight was being remaneuvered this way, but here we have c5 by Dubov. It's a new move, so already as of move 12 we have a completely new game. So what's happening here? After c5 was played, Magnus instantly replied with b4, and b4 is the top move recommended by the engine, so Magnus knows definitely what he's doing here. So it's not nothing like a delayed Evans gambit or anything. It's just a normal b4 move. You guys are so obsessed. So c captures on b4. Dubov accepts the pawn, and now Magnus offers another one with a3, hoping for b captures. Then bishop captures. You get a bishop this very nice diagonal, and you continue development. However, Dubov after this a3 move goes d4 instead. And now Magnus needs to decide, does he capture this pawn, does he capture this pawn with the knight? He could also capture this pawn with the queen, so a lot of possibilities here. The problem with capturing with the queen captures on d4 is that it doesn't yield anything for white. Queen captures, knight captures, and let's say after an offer of a knight trade here, you could trade captures, and now let's say a captures on b4, bishop captures on e5, grabs that e5 pawn, and nothing to it. Material is equal. Yes, black has 3 pawn islands, white has 2, but nothing much. Black has the bishop pair. It's a play on both sides of the board, nothing much here for Magnus. So instead, after this d4 idea by Dubov, we have a captures on b4, and now bishop to b7. Now Dubov fianchettos both of his bishops, and now the two of them will be extremely strong. And I just want to say sorry about the crackling sound in the previous video. I have no idea what happened there. I just, made a test recording right after that video, and the sound was perfectly fine, so I have no idea why that happened. So really, really sorry about that. So here, bishop to b7, like I said, Dubov fianchettos his other bishop, and now Magnus again needs to decide whether he goes for the pawn here, or does he try something different. Here, Magnus goes knight b to d2, and here he says, okay, you have to be a little bit careful. I might play knight to e4. If you play something like e6, I might get a knight outpost for my knight on d6, so Dubov needs to figure out what to do here, and he plays the absolute best move, a5. He wants to trade all the material here and open up the a file for his rook, and the Magnus took some 3 minutes here to decide what to do. Do you capture with the pawn, or do you trade first? So here Magnus decided to capture with the rook. Rook captures on a5, or rather knight to e4 was also an option, but Magnus decides to trade here. Rook captures, b captures, and the queen captures on a5. And only now Magnus captures on d4. And now after all is said and done, Magnus ends this, sort of variation being up a pawn, but Dubov with the bishop pair, it's an extremely tricky position to play. For example, if Dubov were to try and pick up the pawn back, Magnus can simply play knight 2 to f3, attack the bishop now twice. Also, the knight is under attack, so it would be pretty bad to play this with black. If bishop goes back to defend the knight, you can even capture on e7. So it's a much better position for white. So instead, after Magnus played knight captures on d4, we have knight to f5 by Dubov, offering a knight trade. And here, although you could capture, knight captures, rook captures, and go bishop to b2, queen to d5 can be very annoying, just going after that checkmate threat, and you'd have to trade queens like this. Queen to b3, now you prevent checkmate by pinning the queen, and now after, let's say, rook f8, now you trade here, and you continue playing this position. It's perfectly fine, white's still up a pawn, black still has the bishop pair, so it is possible. But instead of this knight captures, we have knight 4 to f3. So just going back with the knight, and here queen to d5 by Dubov. Now Dubov says, okay, my next plan is to go bishop to h6, put pressure on the knight, play rook to d8, put more pressure on the knight, and Magnus will have some trouble moving pieces around. If the knight moves, it's queen to g2 checkmate, and so on. Might even use this as a thumbnail, as it's a pretty nice position. So here Magnus went bishop to b2, so he developed one more piece, and now the e5 pawn is sufficiently defended, and he's not doing great on the clock, but it's okay. He's 7 minutes on the clock, Dubov is some 10 minutes on the clock, and Dubov continues with his plan, bishop to h6. Now there's a double attack here, and rook to d8 is coming, and Magnus just continues with e6. He says, this is not a problem. I now opened up this diagonal for my dark square bishop, and I'm enjoying my position being up a pawn. So rook to d8, and now it's not all that clear what you do here. The knight is attacked 3 times, you cannot move it, as then just queen captures queen. And if you play something like rook to e2, then queen to b5 just shatters your position. The bishop is under attack. If you move the bishop somewhere, just bishop captures on f3, you remove one of the defenders here. The knight cannot capture because the queen falls, and after g captures, your entire position just falls apart. Knight h4, and that's it. White will lose this in a few moves. So instead, after rook to d8, Magnus almost instantly plays queen to e2, as you don't kind of play pawn to e6 on the previous move without seeing queen to e2. So now the point is, if you go after this, if you try and capture it, let's say bishop captures, you just pin the bishop, rook d1, and now after the queen moves, then you pick up your piece, rook captures, knight captures, and again you continue this position, enjoying your extra pawn. So instead, after queen e2, Dubov goes queen to d3. He offers a queen trade, and now Magnus accepts, because he's up a pawn, and once the queens come off the board, he cannot be worse in this position, because for one thing, there are pawns on only one side of the board, and the bishop pair will not be all that impressive. So queen captures rook, captures on d3, and now knight to e4 by Magnus. We have bishop captures on e4. Like I said, the bishop pair is no longer fully operational, so Dubov gives up one of them. Rook captures, and now bishop to g7. And the situation on the clock is Magnus 3 minutes, Dubov 5 minutes. For those of you who are just joining in, after you make a move, you get 10 seconds increment. So bishop to e5, Magnus offers a trade on e5 now, and Dubov accepts. We have captures and knight captures, and now rook to d1 check, king to h2, and king to g7. And now if you let two computers play this position out, of course it's a draw, but these are not computers, these are very fine gentlemen, and they are very low on time. So let's see what happens here. g4, attacking this knight here. We have knight back to d6, and now you want to play f4, but you don't want to play f4 too soon, as for example now your rook is under attack. So rook back to e3, and now they're almost equal on time. Dubov took some time to consider about that knight move, so they're about 3.5 minutes each here. So rook e3, and now g5. Dubov really needs to stop that f4 idea. So king g2, and now h6 by Dubov. We have knight to c6 by Magnus, making moves really quickly. As the title suggests, you have to use the clock as a weapon. So knight c6, king to f6, and now rook to f3 with check. This is how Magnus forces Dubov to capture on e6, because if you move the rook, then it's a free pawn. So Dubov has to capture. Now comes rook back to e3 with check. Now there's a double attack on the e7 pawn. king f6, and now knight captures on e7. So Magnus still up a pawn, but they're on the same side of the board. It's going to be incredibly difficult to convert this into a full point. So knight c4, attacking Carlsen's rook, he goes rook e4, and Dubov quickly repeats knight to d6. As you know, if it's a threefold repetition, then the game ends in a draw. So Magnus goes back, rook to e2, and now rook to d3, again preventing the white king from entering the position. We have knight to c6, and now knight to f7 by Dubov. Dubov just needs to play moves that don't lose, and he needs to not waste more time, so that's his plan. Rook to e3 by Magnus. He's trying to trade off rooks because the knights are very tricky, and Magnus likes his chances in a 3 against 2 with only knights on the board. Of course, if you trade knights, then the game is pretty much instantly a draw. So here offers a rook trade. Of course, Dubov declines. Rook back to d7, and now rook to a3 by Magnus. Again, using the clock as a weapon, as other than that, you don't have a really a viable plan here. So knight to h8 by Dubov, putting the knight on the rim, is often grim, but here it comes with a good plan. Actually, knight to g6 to f4 or h4 will be a very strong piece there. Knight to b8, Magnus does the same. It comes with an attack on the rook, rook b7 attacking here the knight, and now rook to a6 check first. King g7, and only now knight to c6. So knight to g6 by Dubov, and knight to d4 now. And here just knight h4 check. So Dubov completed his plan of shifting the knight all the way to h4. We have king to g3, and now comes rook to b1 by Dubov. Here, rook to b4 was much better, attacking that knight, and well, a lot of other things, but Dubov played rook to b1 as he was very low on the clock. So now feel free to pause the video and try to find the move Dubov missed while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on being a master of the endgame. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's f4. This is what Dubov allowed, and this is now a problem because it allows Magnus to immediately create a passed pawn. And of course, you cannot capture the pawn because then the knight hangs on h4. So although the knight on h4 is very impressive, also comes with a price. So here Dubov finds the only reasonable defense, rook to g1 check, king to f2, now rook to g2 check, king to f1, and now again the problem is you cannot capture on f4, and this is Dubov's big problem because if you capture, just knight f5 check, and you either lose the knight here or you capture the knight and then you lose the rook, and again the position is lost. So here after Carlsen's king f1, rook to d2 is played, attacking the knight, and now knight to e6 with check, again coming with a double attack on g5, king to f7, and now comes f captures on g5, so grabbing that pawn, and here not capturing right away, but rather going knight to f3 first. With h captures on g5, it's still possible to maybe try to defend this, but Dubov played knight to f3. He wanted to get a standard drawing setup, because here knight to h2 check and so on would be a perpetual check and you would be able to draw this, but the problem is now it's completely lost. So feel free to pause the video and win this game for Magnus, as there is only one move that does that. So enjoy. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding the only move on the board that wins. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's not that, it's actually g6 check. And now the problem is you cannot capture it, because if the pawn is captured, knight to d4 with check opens up a discovery and picks up the knight on f3. So black loses a piece in the game. So here after g6, you are forced to move away from the passed pawn. Of course, you cannot go here, the knight guards that, you cannot go here. You could go here, but then of course you run into the very ugly checkmate, rook to 8 check. All these three squares are covered, so you'd have to block, and this of course would be checkmate. So not possible. So after this g6 check, Dubov is forced to go the other way, king to e7, but now comes rook to a3. And this is another great move by Magnus here, because if he was greedy going for g7, then he allows Dubov this very well-known drawing sequence, knight h2 check, king e1 attacks the rook, but now knight f3 check defends the rook, checks the king. have to go back, knight h2 check, king goes here, knight f3 check, king f1. It's a very good technique to know, you know, if you ever run into a position like this. So after this king to e7 move, Magnus not rushing with this, but rather plays rook to a3. The rook is now helping out with the defense here, so now it would be pointless to attempt such a thing. So here Dubov does go knight to h2, but after king e1, now of course you don't have the option of going back because the rook covers that. So rook to d6 was played. And now comes knight to f4, and Magnus now has 3 pawns against one. Also, the g6 pawn is nicely protected, and Dubov has no way of getting that knight into the game as the rook still covers the f3 square. So king f6 is played, and here king to e2. And here Dubov was below 10 seconds on the clock. He played rook to d7, and now rook to a6 with check. King e5, and now comes knight to h5, and it was in this position that Daniil Dubov resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. This is happening. If you try something like rook b7, maybe even to harass the white king, doesn't really matter. g7, you're gonna block the queening square, but now rook to f6, and there's no defense against rook f8. You will block black's rook, and that's it. If you try a couple of checks, just king d3, rook b3 check, king c2 or whatever, and now it's completely lost. You have to go back here. Here you go, blocking this, and now next move you get a queen. I only play it out because I know you guys enjoy it so much. So yeah, really interesting what happened here, and as we made a lot of Dubov videos over the past few days, and I know you guys started to really enjoy his games, and as you can see, he's still playing creatively. He put everything into this game. It's the first game of the day, and he was really trying to go all out with that fully operational bishop pair. But Magnus is just annoyingly strong, and you know, he just crushed Dubov's hopes and dreams here. But you know, if it was someone else who doesn't you know, grind for the win like Magnus, Dubov would most likely have drawn this game, having the bishop pair, or most likely even won the game. But yeah, Magnus is annoyingly strong, and this is what happens. He tends to crush creative players, which is a shame because we like creative players to win, but it is as it is. So yeah, Magnus gets his first win of the tournament. We'll see what happens next. So yeah, I do hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Tom Dorlau, Duras Press, David Bacon, Russell Light, and Timothy Rosan for contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this very nice tournament, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.